Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Dust devils pirouetted down Redemption's main street, a cruel jest given the town's fortunes. Buildings slumped under the weight of neglect, their peeling facades mirroring the weary resignation etched on the townsfolk's faces. A dry, acrid air hung heavy, thick with the scent of baked earth and shattered dreams. Logan guided Smoke, his dun-colored mount, at a measured pace, absorbing the quiet desperation that permeated the place. A wrecked wagon wheel, a skeletal relic, lay discarded before the general store, a stark symbol of the creeping decay. Even the saloon, typically a boisterous haven, emanated a subdued air, its music a somber echo in the sweltering afternoon. Dismounting before the bank, Logan regarded it as the only structure that retained an air of prosperity, a monument to unyielding capital in a community parched for funds. Mercy Belle scanned the horizon, the relentless sun blazing down on her weathered features. Before her sprawled the Double Bar M, a desolate expanse of cracked soil and struggling vegetation. Her cattle, once robust and thriving, had become skeletal outlines, their ribs starkly visible beneath their thin hides. The well, once a dependable lifeline, had diminished to a meager trickle. Her father's inheritance, the land he had wrested from the unforgiving wilderness, threatened to vanish like smoke. Running a hand along a roughly hewn fence post, she felt the crushing weight of responsibility. The bank's looming presence felt predatory, Silas Blackwood circling with vultures. She'd sunk every drop of effort into this ranch. This was far more than real estate. Her soul, her lineage, her prospects. It had to be saved. Smoke-tethered, Logan stepped into the bank's frigid atmosphere, a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat outdoors. Silas Blackwood, a man whose bespoke suit appeared grotesquely out of place in Redemption, occupied a massive oak desk, a smote expression plastered across his face. Mercy stood before him, her spine ramrod straight, eyes flashing with defiance. "Mr. Blackwood," Mercy stated, her voice strained, "I'm here to request an extension." Blackwood reclined in his chair, his gaze gliding over her with insulting deliberation. "Ms. Bell," he purred, "I've already granted you one extension. Business dictates a certain immediacy. I can't simply forgive debts." "The drought's impact has been universal," Mercy countered, her hands clenching into bull fists. "The Double Bar M boasts a fine reputation for profitability. Just grant a little time, and the money will come." Blackwood emitted a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Time translates to revenue, Miss Bell. Your time, unfortunately, has almost expired, unless, of course, an alternative exchange could be arranged." His gaze lingered on her, his implications unmistakable. A surge of anger flooded Logan. He knew that particular leer, that predatory spark in a man's eyes, and it triggered a primal fury within him. Stepping forward, he filled the cramped space with his presence. "Is there a problem here?" he inquired, his voice a low rumble. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Logan, sizing him up with a dismissive flick of his eyes. "This constitutes a private exchange," he replied, his tone condescending. "I suggest that you remove yourself from it. When I see a man exploiting a woman," Logan answered, his gaze unwavering, "it directly interferes with my interests." Mercy gave Logan a cautionary glance, tinged with "Gratitude." "It's fine," she said, turning back to Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood and I have concluded our discussion. Perhaps Miss Bell would prefer our business exchange to be overlooked in the presence of a neutral party? Logan suggested, his hand hovering near the handle of his revolver. Blackwood flushed crimson with rage. "You're meddling in matters which are best kept to yourself," he snarled. "This town requires no further difficulties." "Difficulties seem to occur as a consequence of action," Logan said, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Mercy sighed, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mr. Blackwood, I respect your position," she stated, her voice regaining its steadiness. "But I beg that you reevaluate the circumstances. The double bar M far outvalues the cost to you." Blackwood steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowed to slits. "Very well, Miss Bell," he said, a glint of steel in his tone. "I will allocate 1 additional week, but if you fail to deliver by then, foreclosure will be unavoidable. And don't expect this wanderer to rescue you. He'll vanish before the moon rises." Mercy offered a nod, her face pale with determination. "A week will suffice." She spun on her heel and marched out of the bank, Logan trailing behind. Outside, the sun seemed to mock them with its relentless blaze. "Thank you," Mercy offered, her voice barely audible. "For interfering. My conscience would not allow complacency in a situation such as this," Logan replied, his eyes probing hers. "You don't even know me," she pointed out, a trace of suspicion coloring her voice. "What motivated this gesture?" Logan hesitated, the demons of his past swirling around him. "Let's just say that I have considerable experience in the realm of being exploited," he said, his voice gruff. "And I have a visceral aversion to seeing it inflicted on others." Mercy examined him, her eyes boring through his defenses. She recognized the anguish in his expression, the weariness in his countenance. A man weighed down by something inescapable. "Your name?" she inquired. "Logan," he replied. "Logan Hart." "I am Mercy Bell," she said, extending her hand. "Proprietor of the Double Bar M." Logan accepted her hand, his calloused fingers closing firmly around hers. Her grip felt secure, her touch surprisingly delicate. He felt a jolt, a flicker of something long dormant. Hope. "I require assistance on the ranch," Mercy stated, breaking the silence. "Are you adept with horses?" "I became proficient in riding at a tender age," Logan replied. "Then you're hired," she said, a ghost of a smile appearing on her lips. "I can offer you sustenance, lodging, and equitable wages. I can't, however, guarantee an easy task. I derive an invigoration from the task of working to gain what is deserved," Logan said, his eyes locking with hers. "Good," Mercy said. "We are about to face a calamity, Mr. Hart, and I shall use every tool to stay above." The calamity she mentioned extended far beyond the drought. It encompassed Blackwood, the town's collective despair, and the buried secrets that both she and Logan carried within them, threatening to surface and engulf them both. As they rode towards the Double Bar M, the setting sun cast elongated shadows across the parched landscape, portraying a community on the precipice of ruin, and 2 souls seeking redemption amidst the ruins. Dust and Sparks' dust devils danced around Logan's scuffed boots as he descended from the wagon, the sun a hammer against his shoulders. After helping Mercy offload the high task performed with a practiced, joyless efficiency, he surveyed the Double Bar M. It wasn't the grand spread he'd seen elsewhere, but a tenacious spirit clung to the place like the scent of sage, a quality he recognized and perhaps coveted. "Grub's at sundown," Mercy declared, her voice a sharp counterpoint to the ranch's muted symphony. Caleb will show you to the bunkhouse. Logan nodded, his eyes briefly meeting hers. He noted the worry lines fanning from her eyes, the weariness clinging to her like dust motes in the sunbeams. But beneath that, a fragile hope flickered, quickly shuddered, but present nonetheless. Caleb, a young man green around the edges, bounded forward, his eagerness a bright contrast to Logan's somber presence. "Welcome to the Double Bar M, Mr. Hart. I'm Caleb Jones. Holler if you need a thing." Logan followed Caleb to a ramshackle building set apart from the main house. Inside, the bunkhouse offered little. A pair of cots, a wobbly table, and a cracked wash basin. Meager, but a roof nonetheless. "Mercy's mighty grateful you're here," Caleb said, his voice laced with sincerity. "Times have been rough." Logan grunted, unpacking his meager possessions. A saddlebag holding clothes, a can of beans, and a small leather-bound book. He tucked the book under his pillow, a silent pact with a past he struggled to forget. The following day blazed with oppressive heat. Logan found himself in the thick of branding, the air saturated with the acrid tang of singed hair and the deep-throated bellows of cattle. He moved with intuitive skill, roping calves and bringing them down, his movements honed and precise. Mercy supervised, her face set as she pressed the branding iron, the double bar M searing its mark into each hide. Caleb, anxious to prove his worth, helped restrain the calves, his inexperience plain. Abruptly, a calf, panicked by the heat and chaos, wrenched free from Caleb's grip. It charged toward Mercy, momentarily preoccupied with the branding iron. Logan reacted instinctively, propelling himself forward and shoving Mercy aside. The calf, startled, swerved and vanished into the herd. For a suspended instant, they were entwined, Logan's arm instinctively circling Mercy's waist. He registered the warmth of her body, the frantic throng of her heart against his ribs. Their gazes locked, and the cacophony of the branding faded, replaced by a charged silence. He released her quickly, retreating, his expression unreadable. "You all right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Mercy nodded, her cheeks flushed. "Yes, thank you, Logan." She adjusted her hat, avoiding his eyes. "I appreciate it." The branding carried on, but the atmosphere had subtly changed, humming with a newfound tension. Logan found his attention drawn to Mercy, noting the quiet command with which she managed the livestock, the resolution that hardened her features. She was a woman battling to survive, a woman shouldering a burden with stoic strength. Mercy, in turn, couldn't help watching Logan. He moved with an economy of motion that belied his size, his hands strong and sure in his work. A shadow lurked in his eyes, a guardedness suggesting a troubled history. And yet, his actions revealed a fierce loyalty, a willingness to stand in harm's way. Later, as the sun began its descent, painting the ranch in long amber hues, Mercy discovered Logan repairing a section of fence. He labored silently, his movements both practiced and efficient. She approached, her boots stirring up small clouds of dust. "You've a natural touch with animals," she observed, breaking the quiet. Logan paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with a calloused hand. "Spent most of my life around them." "Not everyone does," Mercy responded, leaning against the fence post. "Caleb's a good kid, but he's still got much to learn." Logan grunted in agreement. He raised his hammer, driving a nail into the wood with a single, decisive strike. "Why redemption, Logan?" Mercy questioned, her tone gentle. "A man like you could be anywhere." He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Needed a place to stop running," he admitted, his voice a bare murmur. Mercy studied him, sensing the pain that resided beneath his words. Running from what? He turned to face her, his eyes shrouded and inscrutable. Myself. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the lonely wail of a coyote in the distance. Mercy knew she'd overstepped, intruded on territory Logan wasn't yet prepared to reveal. "Supper's ready," she said, turning back toward the house. "Don't want it getting cold." Logan watched her depart, his gaze lingering on her retreating back. He had revealed too much, offered a glimpse of the darkness that clung to him. He'd have to be more careful. He couldn't afford to let anyone get close. Not again. The gathering storm, a mournful wind, keened across the plains, sculpting dust into whirling dervishes. The azure sky had vanished, consumed by violet clouds swollen with tempestuous intent. Lightning, a raw gash in the gloom, momentarily bathed the Double Bar M ranch in an eerie cowl. Luminescence. The cattle, typically docile, stirred with anxious bellows, their sounds amplifying the growing apprehension. Mercy stood sentinel on the porch, her hand a visor against the swirling grit. The sharp tang of ozone permeated the air. A primitive warning knell. This was more than mere weather. It felt like divine judgment. A shiver tracked down her spine, echoing the dread gripping her heart. With foreclosure closing in, it seemed nature conspired to deliver the coup de grace. From the barn's shadowed mouth, Logan emerged, a figure of quiet resolve silhouetted against the dim interior, his gaze steady and unwavering, locked onto the brewing storm. He'd weathered countless tempests, yet this one hummed with a peculiar menace that raised the hairs on his neck. "We have to drive them to the lower pasture." Near the creek, Mercy yelled against the rising gale. The gully might offer some shelter. Logan's jaw tightened, a curt nod his only reply. "I'll saddle the horses." The rain began tentatively, a mere spitting. Before exploding into a deluge, the earth transformed instantly into a mire, treacherous and slick. Visibility dwindled to almost nothing as the wind shrieked, clawing at their clothes. Astride their mounts, they battled their way towards the agitated herd. Maddened by the thunder's percussion, the cattle bolted in erratic surges, their hooves pulverizing the ground. Logan, his authority unspoken, his understanding of the beasts instinctive, managed to intercept the most dangerous breaks, coaxing and guiding them toward the relative haven of the lower pasture. Mercy, her face a mask of fierce determination, rode flank, supported by the cattle dogs. The creek, normally a languid trickle, had ballooned into a roiling surge. Without pause, Logan spurred his horse into the churning water, charting a course across the treacherous current. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mercy followed close behind. Reaching the far bank, they labored relentlessly, securing the herd, pushing them into the gully, praying it would offer respite from the tempest's full wrath. Another lightning strike illuminated the tableau. The frantic livestock, the torrential downpour, Logan's face, carved with a fierce, almost desperate intent. Finally, as the storm reached its zenith, they corralled the last of the cattle. Drained, drenched to the bone, they sought refuge beneath a rocky overhang, a temporary sanctuary from the onslaught. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, buffeting the rocks, threatening to dislodge them from their fragile perch. Mercy trembled, and not entirely from the cold. The storm's unbridled force was both terrifying and magnificent. Logan sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the rampaging creek. His silence was profound, his expression unreadable. But as lightning flashed, she caught a glimpse of something raw and exposed in his eyes, a fleeting echo of a pain he habitually concealed. It was a haunted look, a phantom of a past he could not escape. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice swallowed by the storm's roar. "You saved them!" He offered no response, no acknowledgement of her gratitude. He simply stared at the maelstrom, as if hoping to decipher its secrets. Mercy studied him, her gaze drawn to the lines bracketing his eyes, the rigid set of his jaw, the tense clenching of his fists. There was a story etched there, a chronicle of sorrow, and for the first time, a feeling beyond gratitude stirred within her. Something akin to pity? No, more like empathy. She recognized the same storm raging within him, the same struggle against uncontrollable forces. For hours, the storm persisted, testing their stamina, their resilience. As dawn finally fractured the sky, painting it with washes of gray and watery gold, the wind began to relent, the rain softening to a drizzle. The apex had passed. They emerged from their shelter, squinting against the feeble light. The ranch was a portrait of devastation. Fences lay splintered, trees were toppled, and mud coated everything. Yet the cattle were safe. They had endured. Mercy turned to Logan, his face smudged with mud, his eyes still haunted, yet now flecked with a glimmer of relief. "It isn't over," she croaked, her voice raspy. "We still have a mountain of work ahead of us." He nodded, his gaze locking with hers for a fleeting, intense moment. "We will face it together." His words, simple in their construction, resonated with a profound depth that surprised her. It was a vow, a commitment, and in that instant, Mercy understood that the storm had not only tested their mettle, but had also forged a connection, a delicate alliance rooted in shared hardship and a spark of hope. The land, like them, carried scars. The restoration would be arduous, painstaking. Yet, deep within, Mercy sensed a shift in the air. A new beginning was on the horizon. Whispers of the past, the wind shrieked like a tormented spirit against the double-bar EMS kitchen, buffeting the window panes. Rain hammered the glass, obscuring the already weak light seeping in. Mercy steered Logan toward a chair by the hearth, where the fire popped and snapped, the sole source of warmth in the chilly room. He moved gingerly, favoring his left arm. "Let's have a look," she stated, her tone gentle yet unwavering. From a cabinet, she produced a basin of tepid water, clean linens, and a bottle of disinfectant. Logan hesitated, his gaze darting towards the window as if calculating possible exits, even within the relative security of the ranch house. "It's nothing, just a scratch," he mumbled, attempting to withdraw. Mercy's hand halted his. "It's bleeding, and you're favoring it. Let me clean it properly, or it'll become infected." She didn't push, didn't pry, simply held his gaze with a profound steadiness that seemed to penetrate his hardened exterior. He yielded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He observed as she carefully sliced away the tattered fabric of his shirt sleeve, revealing a raw gash along his forearm. It wasn't deep, but it looked painful and inflamed. "How did this happen?" she inquired, her brow creased with worry as she cleansed the wound with a cloth. "Stray debris," he replied, his voice devoid of inflection. Mercy remained unconvinced. She sensed the coiled tension in his frame, the clenching of his jaw as she treated the injury. This wasn't a consequence of happenstance. "Thank you," he murmured, nearly inaudible, once she finished bandaging him. He averted his eyes, focused on the fire, the flames mirrored in his pupils. "You're welcome," Mercy responded quietly. She lingered close, aware of the invisible barrier he kept raised. She longed to dismantle it, piece by piece, but realized she needed to proceed with caution. The silence thickened between them, broken only by the storm's relentless fury outside. Finally, Mercy spoke, her voice hushed. "You know, Logan, you don't have to reveal anything you're not ready to, but it's clear you're carrying a heavy weight, something more than this tempest." He winced, his expression hardening. "You know nothing about me." "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But I understand what it is to bear a burden, to feel crushed beneath the world's pressures. And sometimes, merely speaking of it can lighten the load." Logan scoffed, a dry, mirthless sound. "Talking changes nothing." "Maybe not," Mercy countered. "But it might alter your perspective, the way you manage it. My father always said, 'A burden shared is halved.'" He remained mute, his eyes riveted to the fire. The muscles in his jaw tightened, then loosened. Mercy waited patiently, allowing him space. "After what felt like an age," he began, his voice raspy, hesitant. I made a grave error, a long time ago." Mercy offered no interruption, no pressure. She gave him her full attention. "I was young," he went on, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Foolish. I fell in with the wrong sort. I did something that haunts me every day." He paused, his breath hitching. Mercy could discern the anguish etched on his face, the stark torment of remorse. "What was it?" she asked gently, her tone laced with compassion. He shook his head, his eyes squeezed tightly shut. I can't say." "You don't need to," Mercy said softly. "Just knowing you're hurting, that's enough for the moment." He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. She detected a glimmer within them, vulnerability, perhaps even a nascent trust. "I fled," he revealed, his voice subdued and filled with self-contempt. "I ran from what I did, from who I was. I've been running ever since." "And where were you running to, Logan?" Mercy inquired, her voice calm. He glanced away, back at the flames. "Nowhere, just away." "There's no such place as away, Logan," Mercy declared, her tone firm yet gentle. "Wherever you journey, you bring yourself along. You can't escape your history." He knew she spoke the truth. He'd learned that lesson through bitter experience. Yet that acknowledgement didn't alleviate the weight. His past was a constant, inescapable shadow. "So, what do you do?" he asked, his voice tinged with despair. "If escape is impossible, how does one cope?" Mercy smiled, a small, melancholic smile. "You confront it," she replied. "You face it and learn from it. And you strive to make amends, to evolve into a better version of yourself than you were yesterday." He scoffed. "That's easier articulated than done." "Perhaps," Mercy agreed. "But it's not insurmountable. And you're not alone in the attempt." She reached out and gently touched his hand. He recoiled initially, then gradually relaxed, accepting her touch. Her hand was warm and work-worn, strong and reassuring. He looked at her, truly saw her, for the first time. He recognized the strength in her gaze, the resolve in her jaw, the kindness in her expression. He saw a woman who had weathered her own trials, her own defeats, and emerged stronger. Perhaps, he mused, she could offer him some guidance. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally cease running. The storm continued its onslaught, but within the confines of the cozy kitchen, a tender seed of anticipation had been sown, a seed that, with patience and care, could potentially flourish into something extraordinary. He withdrew his hand, abruptly uneasy with the intimacy. He rose to his feet, I need to check on the horses, he said, his voice rough once more. Mercy acknowledged his need to distance himself. Be careful out there, she cautioned. He offered a curt nod and headed for the door, the tempest swallowing him whole as he ventured forth. Mercy observed his departure, her spirits heavy with a blend of optimism and anxiety. She understood that Logan's path to atonement would be protracted and arduous, but she also recognized that he was no longer isolated in his journey. Maybe, just maybe, that support would prove sufficient to make a difference. Poison Springs Elsie, Mercy's prized milk cow, was the harbinger, staggering drunkenly near the watering trough, her once vibrant eyes now dull pools. Then a ripple of tremors ran through the herd, a low-grade anxiety that spiraled into a chorus of panicked bellows as more animals buckled, their immense forms collapsing onto the sun-baked earth. A shard of ice pierced Mercy's gut, a certainty more biting than any wire fence. She bolted toward the well, the double bar M's vital source. The pump handle's cadence now a jarring counterpoint to the escalating pandemonium. Drawn by the uproar, Logan moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze meticulously charting the scene. The stricken animals, Mercy's dread, spiraling fear. Reaching her, he instinctively placed a hand at the small of her back, a silent anchor. "What's wrong, Mercy?" She pointed, her hand shaking, at the well. "The water, it's tainted somehow." Without a word, he seized a bucket, plunged it into the depths, and hauled it up. Under the unforgiving sun, the liquid appeared faultless, deceptively pure, yet a subtle, metallic tang hung in the air. A ghostly scent that sent a chill crawling up Logan's spine. He cautiously dipped a finger, touched it to his tongue, and immediately convulsed, spitting it out in a violent spasm. "Poison!" he choked, his eyes burning with a sudden fierce light. Someone poisoned the well. The revelation struck Mercy like a physical blow, her knees threatening to give way. Logan steadied her. The water wasn't merely a resource. It was the very lifeblood of the double bar M. Without it, her livestock would perish, her crops would parch, and her aspirations would wither into nothing. Blackwood. The name echoed in the chambers of her mind, a venomous indictment. Who else stood to gain from her downfall? Who would do such a thing? She whispered, her voice thick with rising hysteria. Logan's jaw clenched, granite hard. "Someone who wants you gone, Mercy. Someone covets this land." He surveyed the distant ridges, his eyes narrowed to slits, seeking any trace of the perpetrator. Blackwood. The name left a bitter residue on his tongue. He knew the type men who cloaked their malice in a veneer of civility. They worked tirelessly, Logan harnessing his raw strength to transport water from the creek, while Mercy labored to calm the agitated herd. But it was a futile endeavor. The cattle, weakened and desiccated, refused the water, their systems already ravaged by the toxin. One after another they succumbed, their ragged breaths rasping in the arid air. As twilight descended, casting elongated, mournful silhouettes across the blighted landscape, Mercy crumpled to her knees, dust coating her tear-streaked face like a shroud. The double bar M, her father's legacy, the culmination of her endeavors, was bleeding away, a casualty of greed and corruption. A hand settled on her shoulder. Logan's presence a steadying force in the tempest of her grief. "We'll find a way through this, Mercy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "We're not defeated yet." But all she could see was a dead end. Blackwood had her trapped. He was meticulously dismantling her existence, methodically, piece by agonizing piece. "What can we possibly do, Logan?" she pleaded, her voice fracturing with despair. "He's going to take everything." Logan knelt beside her, his gaze locking onto hers. He saw the stark agony in her eyes, the rising tide of fear threatening to drown her. He understood what it meant to be trapped, to feel the walls closing in. But he also knew that even in the deepest darkness, a spark of defiance could ignite. He had lived it. "We fight," he stated, his voice resolute. "We fight for every acre of this land. We fight for your father's memory. And we fight for each other." He clasped her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "I'm staying right here, Mercy. We'll confront this together." His words offered a fragile solace, a lifeline in the swirling vortex of her despair. But the path ahead seemed insurmountable. Blackwood held all the advantages. He possessed the wealth, the clout, and the ruthlessness to obliterate her. She gazed at Logan, his face a mask of resolve, his eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. He was offering her his strength, his loyalty, his very being. But would it be enough? "He'll destroy you too, Logan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He won't rest until he's taken everything." Logan squeezed her hand, his eyes hardening, a flicker of the darkness he kept tightly leashed surfacing. Blackwood had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated Mercy's fortitude, and he had awakened a sleeping beast in Logan. The stakes had changed. It was no longer solely about rescuing the Double Bar M. It was now about retribution, about justice, about ensuring Blackwood answered for his wickedness. And Logan was perfectly suited to deliver that reckoning. He'd been fleeing his past, but now, at long last, he had found something worth defending, something worth remaining for. And he would not allow anyone, not even Silas Blackwood, to wrest it from him. Shadows of doubt the contaminated earth crunched under Logan's heels as he tracked the faint spore of verdant toxins marring the brittle grasses. Beside him, Mercy's expression was a granite mask, the sinking sun painting elongated, grotesque figures that mimicked tormented spirits across the desolate terrain. Each stride was fraught with hope and dread. The trail veered from the abandoned well, skirting the cadaverous remains of long-dead trees, toward the northern edge of the Double Bar M, the demarcation of Blackwood's domain. "It's him, Logan. Has to be," Mercy hissed, her voice choked with contained fury. "Who else is capable of such depravity?" Logan remained silent, jaw tight. He knew Blackwood's capacity for malevolence, but witnessing the tangible evidence of his viciousness, the desolation he'd sown, ignited a dormant rage, a frigid, unwelcome anger he believed long extinguished. The trail ascended a gentle rise, eventually funneling into a narrow ravine. Logan halted, crouching, a hand extended to still Mercy. "Hold," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. "Something feels amiss." He advanced warily, senses heightened. The air hung stagnant, thick with the stench of dust and rot. Rounding a bend, he saw them. Two hulking figures, faces concealed beneath broad-brimmed hats, were toppling empty drums into a shallow excavation. The containers bore the same telltale emerald residue. Logan emerged from the gully, his sudden appearance startling them. They whirled around, hands instinctively reaching for their sidearms. "Well now," Logan drawled, his tone deceptively languid. "Looks like we've stumbled upon your little dumping ground. Or should I say, poisoning ground." The men exchanged uneasy glances. The taller, a scar cleaving his left eyebrow, stepped forward. "This ain't your concern, stranger. This be on your way." "On the contrary," Logan countered, his eyes hardening. "You've poisoned our well. You've slaughtered our livestock. That makes it Intimately. My concern. The scarred man spat, a dark fleck against the parched earth. You got no proof. Get lost before you regret it. Mercy materialized from the gully, rifle raised, the barrel reflecting the fading light like a promise of retribution. We have all the evidence we require, she stated, her voice vibrating with anger. You're trespassing, polluting, and endangering lives. Drop your weapons. The men hesitated, eyes flicking between Logan and Mercy. They were outnumbered, but driven by desperation. They knew Blackwood's likely response to failure. Don't be fools, Logan warned, his voice low and dangerous. This doesn't have to end poorly. The scarred man sneered. Think you're so tough, cowboy? Let's find out. He drew his weapon, the metallic click shattering the stillness. Logan reacted with blinding speed, his own revolver materializing in his hand. Before the man could level his gun, Logan fired. The bullet slammed into the other man's firearm, sending it spiraling from his grip. His companion, momentarily paralyzed by surprise, froze. I said, "Drop your weapons." Logan repeated, his voice like chipped ice. The second man slowly lowered his gun to the parched ground. The man with the scar, clutching his throbbing hand where the bullet had grazed it, glared at Logan with palpable malice. "You'll rue this," he snarled. "Blackwood will make you pay." "Vanish," Logan commanded, his gun unwavering. "And tell Blackwood we're coming." The two men scrambled away, dissolving into the encroaching gloom. Logan lowered his weapon, his breathing ragged. Mercy stared, eyes wide with astonishment. "Where in God's name did you learn to do that?" she whispered. Logan reholstered his gun, averting her gaze. "It's irrelevant," he deflected. "No, it's not," Mercy insisted, closing the distance. "You moved like a gunslinger. I never suspected you could." He pivoted away, heading towards his horse. "There are aspects of me you don't know, Mercy." "Then enlighten me," she pleaded, reaching to touch his arm. He recoiled, shying away from her touch. "My past is a chapter I'd prefer to keep closed," he said, his voice thick with unspoken pain. "It has no bearing on you." "But it does," Mercy countered. "Everything you do influences me now. We're partners in this, Logan. I require some insight into who's standing beside me." He finally met her gaze, his eyes a turbulent mix of anguish and longing. He yearned to confide everything, to unburden himself of the secrets that festered within him. But fear held him captive. Fear of her judgment, of losing her trust. "There are actions in my history that bring me no pride," he admitted, his voice constricted. "Deeds I can't undo." "We all have regrets," Mercy responded softly. "It's the present that defines us." 2. He wanted to embrace her sentiment, to believe in absolution, in the possibility of a clean slate. But the shadows of his history loomed large, threatening to engulf him. "Let's concentrate on Blackwood," he replied, his voice weary. "He's the immediate threat we must address." He mounted his horse, his expression hardening into a grim mask. Mercy watched him, her heart aching for the unseen burdens he carried. She sensed the hidden torment, the silent struggle consuming him from within. She understood that until he confronted the specters of his past, he would remain shackled. They rode in silence toward Blackwood's ranch, the opulent hacienda a jarring copper, contrast to the arid, struggling landscape around it. A blaze of light emanated from every window, illuminating manicured lawns and imposing gates. It was a fortress of wealth and authority, a testament to Blackwood's unbridled ambition. As they neared the gates, 2 armed sentinels stepped forward, their countenances stern and unwelcoming. "What's your business?" one barked, hand hovering near his gun. "We demand an audience with Blackwood," Logan stated, his voice flat and resolute. The guard scoffed. "Blackwood doesn't fraternize with your kind. Turn around and be gone. Inform him that Mercy Bell and Logan Hart are here." Mercy interjected, her voice unwavering. "Tell him we are aware of the poisoning." The guards exchanged nervous glances. They knew denying them entry was not an option. "Wait here," one conceded, disappearing inside. Logan and Mercy waited in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Sounds of revelry and music wafted from the mansion, a stark reminder of the chasm between their existence and Blackwood's. After what felt like an eternity, the guard reappeared, his face ashen. "Blackwood will grant you an audience," he uttered, his voice barely audible. "But I wouldn't anticipate a cordial reception." The grit of the trail coated Mercy's palate, each swallow a bitter foretaste of what awaited them. Beside her, Logan was a coiled spring, his profile sharpened by the sinking sun. Redemption loomed ahead, reached only by a hard ride with its grim cargo, the canister of poisoned water, Blackwood's calling card. Sheriff Brody's office, redolent of die-old brew and broken promises, offered little comfort. The man himself, slumped behind a desk drowning in paperwork, seemed permanently burdened by the weight of the years. His gaze, a faded blue, sharpened as they entered. "Mercy. Logan. What brings you to my humble abode?" The leather of his chair groaned as he leaned back. Mercy slammed the tainted water onto the desk. Someone's been dumping this filth into the creek that sustains half the county, mine included." Brody circled the container warily. "And you suspect?" "We know it's Blackwood," Logan bit out, his voice like honed steel. "We saw his men in action." Brody's eyes darted between them. "Did you? Now? With witnesses, I presume." Mercy produced the ledger, its pages spread wide on the cluttered surface. The incriminating details, names, dates, sums, chronicled Blackwood's malfeasance. Brody's brow furrowed as he absorbed the damning entries. Silence descended, broken only by the clock's measured tick and the frantic drumming of Mercy's pulse. Finally, he dropped the ledger, the sound echoing in the cramped space. "This is suggestive, at best. Anyone could have written this." "Sheriff," they confessed, Mercy countered, her voice laced with urgency. "They identified themselves as Blackwood employees. They were contaminating our water." Brody sighed, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, Mercy, I empathize with your situation. Times are tough, but accusing Silas Blackwood, that's a hornet's nest. He's poisoning our community, Sheriff." Logan's voice rumbled, a palpable threat. "How much worse does it have to get?" A glint of steel entered Brody's eyes. "Don't you get insolent with me, Hart. You're fortunate I haven't already jailed you for your checkered past." Mercy stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Logan's arm. "Sheriff, please, just investigate. Examine Blackwood's dealings. The town deserves that much." Brody's gaze lingered on Mercy, unreadable. Then he reached for the phone, each movement slow, deliberate. "Perhaps a conversation with Mr. Blackwood is in order, to get his perspective." He began to dial, and Mercy exchanged a look of rising panic with Logan. Something was deeply amiss. "Sheriff." Logan's voice was a low warning. "What are you playing at?" Brody ignored him, speaking into the receiver, his voice suddenly dripping with syrupy deference. "Silas?" Brody here. We appear to have, situation brewing. A chill seeped into Mercy's bones. This wasn't justice, it was collusion. Brody replaced the phone, his eyes meeting Mercy's. The weariness had vanished, replaced by a chilling calculation. It seems Mr. Blackwood harbors certain concerns regarding Mr. Hart. Concerns? Mercy's voice trembled, barely a whisper. What sort of concerns? Brody rose to his feet, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Assault, public disruption, resisting a lawful order. A smirk twisted his lips as he looked at Logan. The list is rather extensive. Those are fabrications, Mercy cried, positioning herself between Brody and Logan. You know that isn't the truth. I'm merely upholding the law, Mercy, Brody stated, his tone devoid of emotion. Now, step aside. Two deputies emerged from the back, their faces like granite. They advanced on Logan, hands outstretched. You can't do this, Mercy pleaded, her voice breaking. He's innocent. He's a hazardous individual, Mercy, Brody said, his eyes fixed on Logan. Always has been. Logan offered no resistance as the deputies closed in. He stood motionless, his face an inscrutable mask, his eyes depths of smoldering fury. Mercy watched in disbelief as they shackled him, the metallic clang echoing car. In the confined space. Logan! She cried, reaching for him. He turned, his gaze reflecting her own anguish. Don't fret about me, Mercy. Just be careful. They escorted him away, into the gathering gloom. Mercy stood frozen, paralyzed by the trail. The sheriff's treachery was a staggering blow, underscoring the suffocating influence Blackwood exerted over redemption. She was isolated, confronting an adversary who controlled not only the land but the very machinery of law. Dust motes swirled in the dying Donneron. Light, each a tiny shard of her shattered hopes. The weight of her family's heritage pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. How could she safeguard the double bar M when those entrusted to defend it had turned against her? The stale coffee now reeked like a funeral shroud. She had to retaliate. But how? The answer remained elusive, swallowed by the shadow of the sheriff's perfidy and the gnawing tendrils of fear. Blackwood had gained the upper hand, for now. But Mercy Bell was far from defeated. Not by a long shot. The town divided. The iron clang of the cell door echoed, amplifying the fraught quiet that gripped redemption's main thoroughfare. Rooted to the spot, Mercy watched dust devils dance around her boots, a reflection of the turmoil churning inside her. Sheriff Brody, his face a study in self-satisfied arrogance, strolled out, hitching up his belt. The townsfolk, a chorus of outrage only moments before, now retreated, their expressions clouded with apprehension. Sheriff. Mercy's voice, though edged with tremor, sliced through the stillness. You know Logan's innocent. Blackwood orchestrated this. A dry, mirthless sound escaped Brody's lips. Evidence is a stubborn thing, Miss Bell. And it points directly to Mr. Hart. Tampering with the town's water is a grave offense. Doctored evidence, Mercy countered, stepping closer. You're Blackwood's puppet, Brody, and this whole town knows it. A ripple of unease stirred through the onlookers. Old man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, shuffled his feet. Sarah Miller, whose children depended on that well, nervously twisted her apron, but silence held them. Captive. Tread carefully, Miss Bell, Brody warned, his gaze sharpening. Such claims could get you into trouble. Perhaps you should focus on salvaging your ranch before that's gone too. He began to move away, but Mercy blocked his path, her stare unwavering. This isn't just about the double bar M, Sheriff, she declared, her voice gaining strength. "It's about the soul of redemption. Are we going to let Blackwood dictate our lives, poison our well, and trample on everything we value? Or will we find the courage to fight back?" Brody's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Seems most folks are just trying to survive, Miss Bell. Can't fault them for self-preservation." He shouldered past her, leaving Mercy to face the subdued crowd. The weight of their fear, their acquiescence, felt crushing. She thought of her father, who'd carved the ranch from the wilderness with calloused hands, a man who never backed down from injustice. She couldn't let his legacy and redemption's spirit wither and die, summoning her. Resolve. Mercy scaled an overturned crate, giving herself prominence. Heads tilted upward, a blend of curiosity and trepidation in their eyes. "My father poured his heart into this town," Mercy began, her voice resonant with belief. "He had faith in its people, in fairness, in integrity. He built the Double Bar M not just for himself, but as a cornerstone of this community. He created jobs, supported families. He was one of us. Now, Blackwood seeks to dismantle it all, piece by piece." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. Beneath the fear, she detected something else, a nascent defiance, a glimmer of hope. "He began by targeting our water, poisoning it to force dependence, to coerce us into selling our land. He's using Brody as his enforcer, arresting an innocent man for daring to oppose him. But we cannot let him prevail. We cannot allow him to destroy everything my father stood for, everything we believe in. We must stand united. We must show Blackwood that redemption is not his to buy." Her words lingered, potent and challenging. A few shifted uneasily, trading glances. Then, Old Man Hemlock stepped forward, his knotted hands clasped. "Your father was a good, honorable man, Mercy," he said, his voice gravelly but firm. "And you're cut from the same cloth. I'm with you." A communal breath seemed to ripple through the crowd. Sarah Miller, drawing her children closer, offered a nod of solidarity. Others followed, their faces hardening with determination. It was a start, a tentative, fragile beginning, but a spark had been lit. As the sun bled across the horizon that evening, casting long shadows and fiery hues across the plains, Mercy found solace on the porch of Esther May's modest cabin. The fragrant blend of sage and wood smoke hung in the air, a soothing balm to her raw nerves. Esther May, her face a palimpsest of time, sat beside her, hands folded serenely. Her presence, though silent, radiated strength. Finally, Mercy broke the quiet. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Esther May," she confessed, her voice hushed. "Blackwood wields immense power. He controls vast wealth, political influence, and he has Brody firmly in his grasp. I'm just one person." Esther May reached for Mercy's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You underestimate yourself, Mercy Bell," she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. "You carry your father's fortitude, his unwavering spirit, his deep-seated belief in what's just. And you possess something more, the affection of this town. Perhaps not openly displayed, but it exists. You must simply remind them of what they are defending." She paused, a twinkle in her eye. "Remember, Mercy, the fiercest tempests often birth the most magnificent rainbows. Blackwood's machinations, they are a storm. But storms eventually subside, and when this one passes, redemption will emerge stronger. Have faith in yourself and in your neighbors." Her words resonated within Mercy, kindling a flicker of hope that teetered on the brink of extinction. She gazed at the expansive, star-strewn canvas above, a surge of determination coursing through her veins. She wouldn't yield. She wouldn't let Blackwood break her. She would fight for redemption, for her father's memory, and for the man she loved. Even if she faced the battle alone. Confined by regret, the cell was a frigid box, rough stone a constant irritant against his shirt. The last rays of the setting sun knifed through the single-barred window, briefly gilding the airborne dust. Logan perched on the squealing cot, eyes glued to the floor. An eternity seemed to have passed, the quiet punctuated only by the jailhouse's ancient groans and a distant dog's lament. He was caged, again, not just within these crude stone walls, but by the phantom shackles of yesterday. Fragments of all memory assaulted him. His younger self, features contorted in fury, fist raised in a smoky bar brawl. The splintered remains of a whiskey bottle, catching the light like malevolent jewels. A woman's face, slick with tears, her accusation's venomous whispers still echoing in the chambers of his heart. He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to banish the ghosts back to their shadowed corners. He'd spent years running, attempting to bury that life beneath layers of assumed identities, drifting like tumbleweed. The double bar M, redemption, mercy. They were meant as just another brief pause, a temporary sanctuary. They had become something far more significant and potentially lethal. Mercy. Her name was a sharp twinge in his chest. Her unshakable faith. Her fiery spirit. The way she looked at him as if seeing a flicker of worth. He'd tried to shield her from the rot he carried, but she'd met his resistance with an even stronger push. He saw her face, obstinate and resolved, confronting Brody, addressing the town. That image ignited a fresh wave of remorse. He had dragged this down upon her. His history, his very presence, had poisoned the cause she was fighting for. He shot to his feet, the cot slamming against the wall. He began to patrol the cramped space, his boots grinding on the stone. A lone wolf, a wanderer. It was in his nature. Flight was a reflex, honed by years of looking back. But this felt different. To run now meant forsaking mercy, abandoning redemption. The past gnawed at him again, its teeth sharper as panic surged. The burden of it threatened to suffocate him. He saw his father, a rigid, disapproving figure, his disappointment a constant weight. He recalled the choices made, the roads taken, each step further from the man his father envisioned. He ceased his pacing, his breath ragged. Leaning against the frigid wall, he pressed his forehead against its coarse surface. The weight of the past was a Palinol, tangible entity, crushing him. He had to act. Blackwood couldn't be allowed to triumph. Mercy couldn't lose everything because of him. But what avenue remained? Imprisoned, powerless, framed for a crime he hadn't committed. Closing his eyes, he sought to quell the storm inside. He had to strategize. He had to discover an escape, not solely for himself, but for Mercy, for redemption. He pictured her hands, rough yet gentle, caring for injured animals on the ranch. He recalled her gazing at the land, her eyes blazing with resolve. He thought of her strength, her resilience, her unwavering devotion to what was righteous. He opened his eyes, a new steely glint hardening his gaze. No more running, no more hiding from the specters of yesterday. It was time to confront them, to banish them for good. He owed it to Mercy. He owed it to himself. He straightened, returning to the edge of the cot. He sat erect, shoulders braced. He wouldn't permit Blackwood to break him. He wouldn't allow his past to be his epitaph. He would fight. He would fight for mercy, for redemption, for the prospect of earning the absolution he so deeply yearned for. He knew the path would be fraught. Blackwood controlled the law, the townsfolk paralyzed by dread. But Mercy had demonstrated that courage could spread, and he sensed she wouldn't surrender without a fight. A thread of hope, fragile but present, snaked through the darkness that had enveloped him. It was a mere spark, flickering, yet it persisted, and he understood, with a conviction that startled him, that he wouldn't let it extinguish. He would find a way out of this hellhole. He would clear his name. He would expose Blackwood for the corrupt manipulator he was, and he would stand by Mercy's side, regardless of the price. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the cell in deep shadows. The air grew colder, the quiet more profound. But Logan felt no chill, no longer felt the oppressive shroud of despair. Constricted by regret, undeniably, but he was also propelled by a newfound fortitude. He was prepared to face his demons. He was ready to battle for his future, for their future. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in what seemed an age, he drifted into sleep. The slumber was uneasy, but it was a sleep infused with purpose. Daring escape moonlight painted the barn floor where Mercy knelt, tracing Caleb's jailhouse blueprint etched into the packed earth. Cracks in the wood planking splayed silver light across the crude design. "The back wall," she murmured, gloved fingers stabbing at a point. "That's our only shot." Perched on an upended bucket, Caleb worried a straw between his teeth. Brody patrols that alley every hour. "Even weakened, Mercy. It's thick stone." "Time's a luxury we can't afford, Caleb." Blackwood is tightening his grip on Logan. The thought sent a shiver snake down her spine. Blackwood wouldn't win. Not this round. Not with Logan's life dangling by a thread. "Dynamite?" Caleb whispered, his voice thin as spun glass. Mercy's headshake was immediate. Too much noise. "The whole town would be on us. We need speed." Silence. Her gaze locked with his, resolute. "Sledgehammers. You and Jed. I'll drool Broody away." Caleb's eyes widened. "Draw him away how?" A humorless smile touched Mercy's lips. "In a way that keeps him busy." The air, thick with wood smoke and the musk of the earth, held its breath. Only the crickets dared to break the silence as Mercy rode toward redemption. The double-bar M burned dark against the fading light. She halted before the saloon, the reek of stale beer and sawdust a familiar punch to the gut. This was it. Dismounting, she secured the reins and pushed through the swinging doors. The saloon was sparsely populated. A smattering of weary cowboys slumped at the bar. Sheriff Brody occupied a corner table, solitaire laid out before him. His eyes narrowed as she approached. "Mercy Bell," he drawled, amusement lacing his tone. "To what do I owe this late-night visit?" "We need to talk, Sheriff," she stated, her voice surprisingly firm despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Brody leaned back, a knowing grin spreading across his face. "About what, exactly?" "Your failing ranch? Your unfortunate entanglement with Logan Hart?" Mercy ignored the bait. "About Blackwood. I know his game." A low chuckle rumbled in Brody's chest. "And what game is that, Miss Bell?" "He's trying to steal my land, using you as his tool." She met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. He framed Logan. Brody's amusement vanished, replaced by granite. "Those are heavy accusations, Mercy. Best be careful. They're the truth, and you know it deep down." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't let him control you, Brody. You're better than this." For a breath, she saw doubt flicker in his eyes. But then, like a candle snuffed out, it was gone. "You're wasting your breath, Mercy," he said, his tone flat. "Now, I suggest you leave before you make things worse." Her spine straightened, defiance blazing in her eyes. "I'm not afraid of you, Brody. Or Blackwood." Turning on her heel, she strode towards the exit, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The diversion was set. Now, everything rested on Caleb and Jed. The night pulsed with the measured beat of sledgehammers against stone. Sweat plastered Caleb and Jed's hair to their foreheads as they swung with all their strength, each impact reverberating through the still air. The weakened wall shuddered under the relentless assault, a web of cracks spreading across its surface. Inside the jail cell, Logan listened, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd been trying to disconnect, to embrace the inevitable. He wanted her to forget him, but then he heard it. The sound of struggle. The sound of Mercy refusing to let him die. The sound of hope blooming in the darkness. Finally, with a sound like thunder splitting the sky, the wall buckled and caved, leaving a jagged hole in the alleyway. Caleb and Jed staggered back, gasping for breath. "Logan, go!" Caleb urged, his voice hoarse. Without hesitation, Logan squeezed through the opening, the rough stone tearing at his skin. He looked at Caleb and Jed, their faces pale in the moonlight. "I owe you both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just get out of here, Logan," Jed grunted. "For Mercy's sake." Logan nodded, then vanished into the shadows. He knew where to find her. Sheriff Brody exploded from the saloon, his face a mask of fury. "Where is she?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the walls. The bartender, a wizened man with a curled mustache, jerked a thumb towards the back. "She headed out that way, Sheriff." Brody stormed out, gun drawn. He spotted Mercy silhouetted against the horizon, galloping away on her horse. "Stop," he bellowed, firing a shot skyward. Ignoring him, she spurred her horse onward, the wind screaming in her ears. She heard Brody's horse gaining, the pounding hooves a relentless drumbeat behind her. Logan materialized from the darkness, intercepting Brody. He stepped into the path of the oncoming horse, forcing the sheriff to yank back on the reins. The horse reared, its whinny piercing the night. "Logan!" Brody bellowed, his face crimson. "Get out of my way!" Logan stood firm, his eyes locked on Brody's. "Let her go, Brody. This isn't your fight." "She's aiding and abetting a fugitive," Brody snarled, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I have to arrest her." "You know I'm innocent," Logan said, his voice dangerously low. "Blackwood framed me." Brody hesitated, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then he steeled himself, his expression hardening. "I have my orders, Logan." "Then you're a damn fool," Logan spat, contempt dripping from his words. Brody raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Mercy wheeled her horse around, barreling into him and sending him sprawling. His gun skittered across the ground. "Logan, now!" Mercy screamed, grabbing his arm. Logan didn't hesitate. He leaped onto the back of her horse, wrapping his arms around her. Together, they fled redemption, leaving Sheriff Brody choking on dust. Streaks of dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and apricot as Mercy and Logan crested a ridge overlooking redemption. They pulled their horses to a halt, their chests heaving. Below, the town lay quiet and unsuspecting, oblivious to their daring escape. Mercy turned to Logan, her eyes brimming with relief and gratitude. "We did it," she breathed, her voice barely audible. Logan gazed at her, his heart overflowing. He reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "We did," he echoed. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss fueled by passion, release, and the whisper of a future yet to be written. They weren't safe. They weren't free. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had hope. And they had each other. Ambush in the Badlands. The air was a stifling blanket as they topped the rise, the double-bar MA, distant blur shimmering in the heat. Logan's gut clenched. Danger screamed from the bleached earth. He hauled back on Buck's reins, the horse skidding to a halt. Beside him, Mercy, astride Willow, questioned him with a furrowed brow. "What is it?" He remained silent, his gaze pinned to a jumble of rocks ahead. Sunlight flashed a metallic glint, too sharp, too calculated to be natural. "Ambush," he ground out, already leaping from Buck. "Mercy, down!" Before she could react, the air shattered with the roar of gunfire. Hornets of lead buzzed past, puffing up miniature dust storms. Mercy cried out, tumbling from Willow's back. Logan hauled her behind a meager sandstone outcrop, the rock radiating heat. "Blackwood," she whispered, her voice strained with fear and fury. Logan didn't waste breath confirming the obvious. Peeking around the edge, he counted. 5 masked riders, carbines trained on them. Hired killers, their expressions as vacant as their moral compasses. He knew that grim efficiency, the cold-blooded precision in their movements. He'd witnessed it too often. "We can't stay put," he said, his voice a low growl. "They'll have us pinned." "Where to?" Panic widened Mercy's eyes. The sandstone offered negligible shelter. Logan jerked his head toward the chaotic network of canyons and ravines scarring the Badlands. "Into the Devil's Maw. It's our only play." He squeezed off a shot, forcing their attackers to duck for cover, then grasped Mercy's hand. "Move it!" They scrambled down the incline, loose scree skittering under their boots. Bullets nipped at their heels, a lethal concerto echoing through the defiles. Reaching the bottom, they plunged into the labyrinthine terrain, the landscape swallowing them whole. The hunt was on. The Badlands were a merciless teacher. The sun, a malevolent eye, glared down, parching the land. Thorns clawed at their clothes, the air tasted of dust and despair. Logan urged Mercy forward, using his body as a shield, his senses sharpened to a keen edge. The riders were gaining. He could hear the drumming of hooves on the baked earth, the rough shouts of men closing in. "Can you ride?" he asked, his voice tight. Mercy nodded, her face pale yet firm. "Yes, but Willow." "She'll manage," Logan stated, though the mare's labored breathing belied his words. They discovered a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for Willow to navigate. Logan boosted Mercy into the saddle, then swung up onto Buck. They pressed onward, the canyon walls closing in, the sound of pursuit amplifying. The canyon suddenly bled into a small, secluded valley, a verdant haven amid the desolation. A spring gurgled from the rocks, nurturing a small explosion of wildflowers. It was an oasis, a fleeting sanctuary from the relentless chase. "Water," Mercy rasped, sliding from Willow. She stumbled toward the spring, cupping her hands to drink deeply. Logan remained mounted on Buck, his eyes sweeping the perimeter. The sudden hush felt wrong. He didn't trust it. Blackwood's men weren't the type to yield easily. "Logan?" Mercy's voice trembled. "What is it?" He dismounted, his hand instinctively finding the butt of his revolver. They're sniffing around. Too close. He led Buck and Willow behind a dense thicket of scrub, masking them from view. Turning to Mercy, his gaze hardened with resolve. "We make our stand," he declared, his voice low and steady. "Here, now." Mercy met his gaze, exhaustion and fear etched onto her face. Yet, within those depths, Logan spotted a flicker of defiance, that same fierce spirit that had drawn him to her initially. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice a mere breath. A surge of something long dormant coursed through Logan, a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. Looking at her, seeing her fortitude, he knew he would lay down his life to protect her. Blackwood would not claim her land, her spirit, her life. Not if he had any say. He drew her close, his hand gently framing her face. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Trust me." He positioned her behind a cluster of boulders, handing her his rifle. "Can you handle this?" Mercy nodded, her grip firming on the weapon. Her father had taught her marksmanship as a girl, a skill gathering dust. Now, her family's heritage, her very survival, hung in the balance. Logan moved to the valley's edge, his Colt peacemaker drawn. He inhaled deeply, trying to subdue the tempest raging within. No longer fleeing his past, he stood, prepared to fight for a future he'd believed unattainable. The riders materialized from the canyon mouth, their faces hard, their weapons at the ready. They fanned out, encircling the valley, their eyes raking the landscape. They exuded confidence, bordering on arrogance, anticipating an effortless victory. Logan smiled, a mirthless expression. They were in for a rude awakening. He waited until they were within range, then unleashed chaos. The valley erupted in a maelstrom of gunfire, the air thick with smoke and the biting tang of gunpowder. Logan moved with practiced speed and lethal grace, his shots unerringly finding their marks. Mercy joined the fray, her shots perhaps less precise, but no less impassioned. She fought with a raw ferocity she hadn't known she possessed, fueled by a primal instinct to safeguard herself and the man who had become so indispensable. One by one, the riders crumpled, their forms sprawled lifelessly on the arid ground. But their ranks still held. Logan recognized the dire odds they couldn't withstand this onslaught indefinitely. Without warning, a bullet sliced the air near his temple, close enough to feel its searing passage. He whirled around, catching sight of one of the riders aligning his rifle on Mercy. "No!" Logan bellowed, throwing himself in front of her. A jolt of white-hot agony seared through his shoulder, the impact felling him. He glanced upward, witnessing the gunman readying for a second shot. Time ran out. Then, a shot echoed, and the attacker pitched forward, his body cascading from his horse. Mercy stood behind him, rifle smoking, her face drained but undaunted. Logan stared, his heart thundering. She had saved him. The remaining riders, momentarily stunned, hesitated. Logan capitalized on their uncertainty, unleashing a barrage of shots that sent them scrambling for cover. They beat a retreat back into the canyon, vanishing into the labyrinth of ravines. Logan watched them disappear, his body screaming, his shoulder throbbing. He knew they'd be back. Blackwood wouldn't relinquish his prize so easily. Turning to Mercy, his gaze flooded with gratitude and admiration. "You saved my life," he rasped, his voice raw. Mercy rushed to his side, kneeling, her hands trembling as she assessed his wound. "You saved mine," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Tearing a strip from her dress, she bound his shoulder, staunching the blood flow. Logan flinched, but remained silent. The pain was inconsequential compared to the profound gratitude he held for her. Gazing at her, seeing the strength and resilience shining in her eyes, he knew that together they could endure anything. They would not be broken. They would not be conquered. They would fight for redemption, for the double Baram, for each other. They had survived the ambush, but their trials were far from over. The Badlands remained a perilous landscape, and Blackwood still lurked, waiting in the shadows. Yet, as Logan looked at Mercy, he felt an unwavering certainty. They were not alone. They had each other, and that was enough. Secrets shared, the canyon was Time's sanctuary, a place of red rock indifference. Walls, painted with desert varnish in streaks of ochre and umber, soared skyward, a bulwark against the sun's hammer and any unwelcome gaze. A mere thread of a stream, more promise than river, unwound through the sand, nurturing a verdant clutch of cottonwoods and willows, offering scant reprieve from the heat. The horses were stowed deep within this green haven, their presence swallowed by the dense leaves. Mercy sat, the canteen a weighty presence against her thigh, on a boulder smoothed by eons. The adrenaline, residue from the ambush, had ebbed, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She watched Logan by the water's edge. His movements were economical as he splashed his face, a man chiseled from granite and gloom. A certainty settled within her. His past was a locked room he'd sooner burn than unlock. Safe enough. For now, he rasped, approaching. His gaze skirted hers, fixed instead on some distant point. Blackwood will wager we're bound eastward, toward the law. He won't imagine we'd bury ourselves in plain sight. A nod from Mercy, but her thoughts were ensnared by the man before her, he who had risked all to save her. His very nearness sent tremors through her, even against the backdrop of imminent danger. "Logan," she began, her voice a tentative thread. "Back there you saved me. Why?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his features, so fleeting it was almost imagined. He turned, pacing with barely contained energy, dislodging a pebble with the toe of his boot. "I told you, Mercy, I'm in your debt." "Eh? In your debt?" she echoed, brow furrowed. "For employment? That doesn't explain it. You had every chance to flee, to vanish and be done with redemption. With me, you remained." He froze, back to her, shoulders a tense line. The silence thickened, broken only by the sighing of leaves in the breeze. At last a whisper. "It's more complicated." Mercy rose, the pulse quickening at her throat. She approached, halting inches away, close enough to feel the heat emanating from him, close enough to see the etched map of sorrow around his eyes. "Tell me," she urged, her voice a plea. "Tell me what is." He swiveled, his gaze finding hers, and what blazed within stole her breath. A nakedness, raw and exposed. An ancient sadness proclaiming a burden carried too long. "There are shadows that cling to me, Mercy," he confessed, his voice rough-edged. "Deeds I rue, things that haunt. Everyone bears a past, Logan." She countered, reaching to touch his arm, her fingers light. "It's what we forge from it that defines us." He recoiled, a fierce light igniting in his eyes. "You fail to grasp," he said, voice rising in pitch. "You can't grasp. Your spirit is too fine, too pure. Knowing my truth, you'd want nothing to do with me." Stung, Mercy stepped back, yet her resolve remained unbent. She knew, with unwavering conviction, that whatever shadows he harbored, they didn't comprise the entirety of his being. She'd glimpsed the kindness in his gaze, the strength held within his hands, the unwavering loyalty he demonstrated through action. "Test me," she insisted, her voice unwavering. "Allow me to judge." He stared, his gaze delving, dissecting, as if gauging the very depths of her understanding. He seemed caught in a war within himself, battling the need for confession against the dread of rejection. Finally, a sigh, weighted with resignation. "It's a tale from long ago," he began, his voice low, a ghost of sound. "Youthful folly, recklessness. I was all vinegar and bravado, convinced of my own invincibility." He paused, swallowing thickly, his gaze riveted to the ground at his feet. "There was a girl," he pressed on. "Sarah. She poured drinks at the Jericho saloon. I was enthralled. She possessed a radiance, vitality, a spirit brimming with life." He halted again, his hand forming a tight fist. Mercy waited, patient and quiet, giving him the space to find the words he needed to unearth. "Another man coveted her," he revealed at last. "An established rancher from the region, older, wealthier. He looked upon my courtship with displeasure. One night, fueled by too much whiskey, we clashed," Logan continued, his tone now flat, hollow. "He produced a knife. I defended myself. The intent was not there, but I ended his life." The words hum, oppressive and heavy. A shiver traced its way down Mercy's spine, despite the day's heat. She fixed her gaze on Logan, her mind reeling, struggling to reconcile the man she knew with this stranger painted by confession. "What followed?" she whispered. "Flight," he said, his voice thick with self-reproach. "Panic gripped me. Confusion clouded my judgment. I knew no other path. I abandoned Sarah. I abandoned Jericho. I abandoned everything. And I've been fleeing ever since." He looked up, his eyes pleading for some semblance of understanding. "It's the reason I never linger in one locale," he said. "It's why I keep walls high and keep everyone at a distance. I'm not a virtuous man, Mercy. I'm a killer." Mercy took a step forward, erasing the space between them. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers weaving with his. His hand was rough with calluses, yet his grip was gentle. "You acted in self-defense," she offered, her voice clear, unwavering. "A tragic accident. Intention played no part. Yet it occurred," he replied, his voice choked. "And the weight of it has been my constant companion." Mercy squeezed his hand, her eyes swimming with compassion. "You have been inflicting punishment upon yourself," she corrected gently. "There exists a difference. You cannot rewrite the past, Logan, that you can dictate the future. You have the power to ascend." He searched her face, his eyes reflecting doubt, yet a fragile spark of hope flickered within. "Do you truly hold that conviction?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Mercy nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I do," she affirmed. "I hold firm to the belief that all deserve a second chance. And Logan Hart, I believe that despite the darkness you may carry, you are intrinsically a good man." She drew closer, her hand rising to cradle his cheek. He leaned into her touch, his eyes shutting tight, drinking in her warmth, her unwavering belief. "Thank you, Mercy," he breathed, his voice laden with emotion. "Thank you for listening." Mercy smiled softly, her heart overflowing with tenderness and an undeniable sense of hope. "No gratitude is needed," she assured him. "We navigate this path together, remember? No matter the trials, we face them as one." His eyes opened, locking with hers. And for the first time, Mercy saw a hint of tranquility nestled within their depths. The shadows remained, but they appeared less menacing, less all-consuming. He dipped his head, his forehead coming to rest against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "Together," he murmured. "The sound of that holds a certain appeal." The silence pressed down on them, a palpable weight more stifling than the sun-bleached dust swirling in the canyon's meager light. Logan avoided Mercy's searching gaze, his attention fixed on the parched earth. The confession had burst forth, a splintered piece of his history he'd desperately tried to suppress, now laid bare and vulnerable at her feet. He steeled himself for condemnation, convinced he deserved nothing less. Yet Mercy didn't flinch. She remained a short distance away, mealing, her face an enigma. At last she spoke, her voice a mere thread carried on the arid breeze. "Logan, you were just a kid." He recoiled as if struck. "That's no justification. I ended someone's life." The words were bitter on his tongue. "It isn't," she conceded, her tone strengthening, "but it offers context, and it certainly doesn't define the man you are now." Rising with slow deliberation, she closed the distance between them. He refused to meet her eyes. She knelt again, directly before him, compelling his attention. Her eyes, the color of bruised skies moments before a storm, held a compassion he couldn't comprehend, didn't believe he warranted. "Look at me, Logan." He finally raised his head, his eyes pools of anguish and remorse. He found no judgment in her expression, only profound sorrow. "Tell me what happened," she urged gently. He hesitated, the memory a brand seared into his consciousness. Speaking with difficulty, he unearthed the words. Details, once razor-sharp, were now softened by the passage of time and heavy regret. Yet the emotions remained excruciatingly vivid. He recounted the argument, the drunken fray, the accidental arc of the shovel that extinguished a life. He spoke of the terror, the blind panic, the frantic escape. By the time he finished, a tremor shook him, his body convulsed by a grief he'd imprisoned for years. Mercy reached for his hand, her touch a warm anchor. "You fled," she stated quietly. "Terror drove you. But that boy is gone, Logan." He shook his head vehemently. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Mercy. Just a specter haunting the edges of my own existence." "You're a good man," she countered, her grip firm. "I've seen it, felt it, from the moment you helped me with the fence. You had no obligation to stay, no reason to endanger yourself for me, for redemption, yet you did. That isn't the action of someone beyond salvation." He yearned to believe her, craved it with every fiber of his being, but his past whispered incessantly, a litany of failures and guilt. I'm not worthy of you, Mercy," he choked out, pulling his hand away. "I'm not worthy of any of this." Mercy stood, her stance resolute. "Worthiness is irrelevant. This isn't a reward, Logan. It's an invitation to forgive yourself, to begin anew." She extended her hand. "Come on. A town is counting on us." He stared at her outstretched hand, then back at her face. He saw fortitude, resilience, and an unwavering faith in him that defied understanding. Grasping her hand, he allowed her to pull him upright. As they emerged from the canyon, the sun appeared to burn a little brighter, the air tasted a little less stale. The weight on his soul hadn't vanished entirely, but its burden felt less crushing. He still faced a long and arduous journey, but for the first time in years, a faint light flickered. a fragile ember of hope for redemption. The subsequent days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Their immediate need to return to redemption, to gather the remnants of the populace, and to anticipate Blackwood's next strategy, relegated Logan's confession to the periphery, though it lingered as a persistent undertone in their interactions. One evening, as they huddled around a meager fire, the sole beacon in the encompassing darkness, Mercy broke the silence. "You know," she remarked, idly poking at the embers with a twig, "my father always said everyone deserves a clean slate." Logan glanced at her, surprised. He hadn't anticipated her revisiting the subject. "He wasn't perfect, my father," Mercy continued, her voice subdued. "He stumbled, made grievous errors. But he always strived to atone. He held a strong belief in the power of grace, both extended to others and granted to oneself." Logan remained quiet for a long while, observing the dance of the flames. "It's not simple," he admitted at last. "Releasing yourself from your own judgment." "No," Mercy agreed. "It's arguably the most challenging endeavor there is. But it's not unattainable. A beginning must be made somewhere. And perhaps—" She looked at him, her eyes glowing with warmth. "Perhaps it's a burden you don't have to bear alone." He reached across the fire, his fingers entwining with hers. The simple act spoke volumes. "Thank you, Mercy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." She squeezed his hand in return. "We face this together, Logan. Always." As days morphed into weeks, their connection deepened. They confronted peril and adversity side by side, drawing upon each other's strengths, bolstering each other's vulnerabilities. Logan witnessed Mercy's unwavering resolve, her fierce devotion to her town and her livelihood. And Mercy perceived Logan's hidden depths, his quiet bravery, his unwavering dedication to what was right. One night, beneath a celestial tapestry so brilliant it felt within reach, Logan finally surrendered to his affections for Mercy. He drew her close, his hand gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "Mercy," he breathed, his voice raw with emotion. I'm falling for you." Mercy gazed up at him, her eyes shimmering in the starlight. "I think I'm fallin' for you too, Logan Hart." He bent his head and kissed her. A hesitant, tender kiss that conveyed longing, hope, a future only beginning to unfold. It was a kiss that cemented their bond, a pledge of unwavering support and unconditional love. In that moment, enveloped by the immensity of the desert and the radiant stars, Logan experienced a serenity he hadn't thought possible. The ghosts of his past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. He had discovered something worth protecting, something worth living for. He had found love, and within that love, he glimpsed a path toward redemption. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could finally grant himself forgiveness. Showdown at the Double Bar M Dust Devils, like whirling dervishes of despair. Carved patterns across the baked land as they crowned the ridge overlooking the Double Bar M. Logan halted traveler, the familiar protest in his shoulders echoing the deeper ache within him. Mercy, astride Belle, wore a mirror of his somber regard. The ranch appeared diminished, more exposed than his memory held. The buildings clustered, seeking mutual comfort from some unseen threat, their paint blistered and flaking. "It's worse," Mercy whispered, her voice strained. Logan covered her hand with his own, the rough texture of his skin a silent vow. "We'll set it right." They descended, the dry earth whispering beneath the horses' hooves. Approaching the main house, Their arrival shattered the quiet with a joyous eruption of barking. Blue, her Australian shepherd, exploded toward them, followed by a gathering of townsfolk. Caleb Jones, his face smudged and alight with fervor. Esther May, her shawl aflutter in the dry wind, and even old Mr. Abernathy, clutching a shotgun with surprising resolve. "Mercy! Logan!" Caleb yelled, waving his battered hat. "We knew you'd come back." Mercy dismounted, Blue launching herself into her arms. "What is everyone doing here?" Esther May advanced, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Guarding what's ours, child. Blackwood's stranglehold is tightening. We won't let him steal this ranch." A surge of warmth bloomed in Logan's chest, a long-dormant sense of belonging stirring to life. These people, with every reason to cower before Blackwood, stood defiant. "For mercy, for redemption." "Sheriff Brody's been snooping around," Caleb murmured, lowering his voice. "Claims he's been ordered to evict you, Mercy. Something about unpaid debts." Logan's jaw hardened. "Blackwood's doing." Mercy squared her shoulders, a flinty glint entering her eyes. "Then we'll be prepared." She scanned the faces around her, a mixture of anxiety and steely determination etched on them. "Thank you, all of you. It means everything." The ensuing hours dissolved into a frenzy of action. Windows were fortified, doors reinforced, strategic positions claimed around the homestead. Logan, leveraging years of hard-won experience, guided them in improvising defenses, transforming farm tools into implements of war. Caleb, bursting with eagerness, soaked rags in kerosene, ready to create a blazing barricade. Esther May, surprisingly, revealed a marksman's eye with a rifle, her unwavering hand belying her age. Twilight descended, painting the ranch in long, skeletal shadows, bringing with it a taut silence. The very air thrummed with anticipation, broken only by the anxious nicker of horses in the corral. Mercy joined Logan on the porch, her rifle a comfortable weight against her hip. "Are you certain about this, Logan? I don't want anyone hurt." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Blackwood won't quit until he owns everything. We have to stand our ground." He paused, his voice softening. "Besides, I won't let anything happen to you." She reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his. "I'm grateful you're here, Logan." A distant rumble shattered the quiet. Headlights materialized on the horizon, growing like angry eyes with each passing second. The confrontation was at hand. Sheriff Brody's voice, amplified by a megaphone, ripped through the air. "Mercy Bell, surrender peacefully. You are trespassing on property legally belonging to Silas Blackwood." Mercy gripped her rifle harder, knuckles white. "Tell Blackwood to come and try to take it." Brody's tone turned menacing. "This is your final warning." Logan nodded to Caleb, who hurled a lit rag onto a pile of brush near the ranch entrance. Flames roared to life, a fiery curtain separating them from the approaching vehicles. Gunfire erupted, the night splintering into a chaotic symphony of noise and light. Bullets whizzed, biting into wood and churning up earth. Logan moved with practiced grace, his rifle barking with deadly precision, felling one of Blackwood's men who had attempted an outflanking maneuver. Mercy, beside him, fought with courage, her shots finding their marks. Esther May, from her perch in the barn, provided covering fire, her aim disturbingly accurate. Caleb, swept away by the maelstrom, charged forward, firing indiscriminately. Logan hauled him back behind cover by the scruff of his neck. "Easy, son. You'll get yourself killed." The battle raged on, the defenders of the Double Bar M refusing to yield against overwhelming numbers. But Logan knew their resistance was finite. Blackwood's thugs were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. A cataclysmic explosion shuddered through the ranch. The barn, Esther May's sanctuary, blossomed into a pyre. "Esther May!" Mercy shrieked, her voice laced with terror. Without a second thought, Logan bolted toward the inferno, ignoring the hail of lead. He had to reach her. He had to protect the woman who had shown him such compassion. He plunged through the burning doorway, the heat scorching his lungs. The barn was a swirling vortex of flames, the air thick with choking smoke. He spotted Esther May, trapped on the floor, pinned beneath a fallen rafter. "Logan, get out!" she gasped, her voice fading. He ignored her, straining to lift the beam. The timber was impossibly heavy, the flames licking at his clothes. With a final surge of adrenaline, he managed to free her. He scooped her into his arms and stumbled back toward the exit, the roof collapsing in on itself behind them. As they cleared the doorway, the entire barn disintegrated in a fiery implosion, showering the night with sparks and debris. He carried Esther May to safety, gently laying her on the ground. Mercy rushed to her side, tears streaming down her face. "Esther May, are you all right?" The old woman coughed, her face ashen. "I'm fine, child. Just a bit toasted." Logan stood back, chest heaving, body screaming in protest. He had saved her. He had actually saved someone, but the battle was far from concluded. Blackwood's men were regrouping, preparing their next assault. And Logan knew, with growing dread, that this time their luck might have run out. He looked at Mercy, her face smudged with grime and tears, her eyes blazing with defiance. He had pledged to protect her, and he would, even if it cost him everything. The fate of the Double Bar M and of redemption itself teetered on a razor's edge. Redemption's dawn, the air vibrated, a tangible thing born of the approaching tempest and the violence unleashed. The staccato bursts of gunfire ripped the afternoon's stillness, shattering glass at the Double Bar M and spitting dirt into the already arid landscape. Sheltering Esther May behind the water trough, Logan registered the hot prick of a bullet's kiss on his arm, dismissing it instantly. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, focused on the advancing posse Brody in the lead, Blackwood shadowing him like a vulture anticipating a feast. Mercy, rifle a natural extension of her body, worked the lever with fluid grace. Each shot a precise warning, aimed to discourage, to defend. Her eyes swept the line, finding Logan's, a silent query passing between them. "Can we hold?" A shriek ripped through the chaotic din. Caleb, sprawled near the barn, clutched his mangled leg. Mercy's breath hitched. Distraction was a perilous indulgence, yet the sight of one of their own felled ignited a fierce protectiveness within her. She surged forward, heedless of the lethal hail. "Mercy, damn it, no!" Logan bellowed, shoving Esther May toward the house's meager shelter. He recognized that abandon. He'd worn it like a second skin. She was deaf to his plea, blind to the gleam of a rifle barrel as one of Brody's men. Emboldened by her rashness, drew a bead on her. The shot cracked, sharp and brutally familiar. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an eternity of agonizing clarity. He watched her body contort, heard the small, surprised sound she made. Pure, unadulterated rage seized him, a primal force breaking free. He was a man transformed, his buried past, a history of bloodshed, erupting with savage force. He reached her as she collapsed, a crimson bloom spreading across her shirt, staining the denim a horrifying shade. "Mercy!" He knelt, pulling her into his arms. Her eyelids fluttered, a weak smile gracing her lips. "Logan, be careful." She breathed, her voice a fragile wisp. The world constricted. Only Mercy existed, wounded and vulnerable, and the burning imperative to shield her. He gently lowered her to the ground, his eyes hardening as he rose to awe. Confront the attack. This ends, he vowed, his voice a low guttural growl. He moved with a lethal grace honed by years spent on the margins. He disarmed Brody's men with brutal efficiency, turning their own weapons against them. A flicker of dread ignited in their eyes as they saw the tempest gathering within him. This was no longer a rancher defending his land, but a force of nature unleashed. Brody, witnessing the baw. "Shift in momentum," barked orders, but his voice lacked conviction. The fight bled from him. He knew, in his heart, that Blackwood's empire was built on treachery and fear. Logan advanced on Blackwood, who stood paralyzed, his face a mask of disbelief. The carefully crafted illusion of power had shattered, revealing the pathetic charlatan beneath. "You!" Logan spat, each word a physical blow. "This is your doing," Blackwood stammered, a desperate, craven plea escaping his lips. "It doesn't have to be this way, Logan. We can still find common ground." Logan's laugh was devoid of humor, a harsh, grating sound. "Common ground? You tried to steal everything from her. You hurt her." He closed the distance, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. He tasted the dark temptation to kill, the savage satisfaction that would come from extinguishing Blackwood. But that wasn't the answer. That was not the man Mercy believed him to be. With a lightning strike motion, he disarmed Blackwood, sending the gun skittering across the parched earth. He could have ended it then, but didn't. He wouldn't. Instead, he seized Blackwood by the scruff of his neck, dragging him towards the gathering townsfolk who had emerged from their call. "Hiding places." "Listen," Logan roared, his voice resonating with authority. "Silas Blackwood has been manipulating you, feeding you lies. He's been buying up your land, trapping you in debt. He's been bribing officials, twisting the law to his advantage." He plucked a wad of papers from Blackwood's coat, scattering them like fallen leaves in the wind. Deeds, contracts, ledgers rife with damning evidence. A wave of angry murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion morphing into outrage as they recognized the names, the properties, the deceptions. Brody, acknowledging the inevitable, quietly unpinned his badge and dropped it, the tarnished metal landing in the dust. Blackwood's hired guns lowered their weapons, shame etched on their faces. Blackwood flailed in Logan's grasp, his face a grotesque mask of fury. Terror. "You can't prove anything." "They'll never believe you." "They'll believe what they see," Logan said, his voice steady, unwavering. "They'll see the truth laid bare." He released Blackwood, who stumbled back, defeated. The crowd surged forward, their anger a palpable force. The illusion of invincibility had vanished. He was merely a man, exposed, vulnerable, alone. Logan turned away from the spectacle, his gaze drawn back to Mercy, where Esther May and Doc Henderson were tending to her. He knelt beside her, clasping her hand. "How is she?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Doc Henderson straightened, his face etched with exhaustion. "She's lost a good bit of blood, but the bullet skirted any vital organs. She's a tough one, Logan. She'll mend." A wave of relief washed over him, almost buckling his knees. He looked down at Mercy, her face pale, but her eyes clear. "You did it," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "You saved us." He shook his head. "We saved each other." The storm finally broke, rain pummeling the double bar M, washing away the blood and the dust, but unable to erase the truth. The truth revealed, the lies exposed, the redemption earned. As the rain cascaded, Logan gazed at the faces of the townspeople, their anger gradually giving way to a fragile hope. He looked at Mercy, her spirit a beacon in the tempest. He looked inward, at a man who had fled his past for too long, at last finding a reason to stay. He knew the path ahead would be arduous. Investigations, trials, the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. He had discovered something worth fighting for. He had found a home. He had found love. And in the heart of a wounded woman and a community yearning for a better future, Logan Hart finally found his own absolution. A future forged steel marred Blackwood's wrists as Brody, a grim smile twisting his face, escorted him to the waiting buckboard. The fight had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, defeated posture. He refused even a glance at Mercy, wan but breathing on the porch, or Logan, a silent guardian beside her. His gaze remained fixed on the dust devils dancing around his finely crafted boots as he was unceremoniously hauled aboard. As the buckboard rattled away, Blackwood's departure seemed to release a pressure valve across the town. The palpable tension of moments before thinned, like smoke on the wind. Esther May fussed over Mercy, a symphony of worried clucking. Nearby, Caleb Jones, arm bound in a sling, shifted uneasily. "She'll mend, Logan," he rasped, his voice laced with concern. "That one's tougher than boot leather." Logan simply nodded, his focus unwavering. The bullet's passage had been clean, Esther May had assured him, but the shock had taken its toll. He hadn't stirred from her side since the gunshot, his usual reserve fractured, revealing a desperate tenderness. He gently swept a rogue strand of hair from her brow, his touch lingering. The following days blurred, a canvas painted with anxiety and hushed vigilance. Mercy swam in and out of awareness, her fever a capricious tide. Logan's appetite vanished. Sleep eluded him, haunted by the memory of her fall, by the searing dread that had gripped him when he thought her lost. He'd stared down death's barrel countless times, but never with such devastating potential for loss. When Mercy's eyes finally cleared, recognition blooming in their depths, a faint smile touched her lips. A wave of relief crashed over Logan with such force it nearly buckled him. He collapsed into the chair beside her, burying his face in his hands, the wellspring finally overflowing. Words failed him, but she understood implicitly. Her hand sought his, her grip feeble but resolute. "You came back," she breathed, her voice a dry whisper. He lifted his head, his eyes raw. "Always," he vowed, the word a bedrock promise. As Mercy slowly gathered strength, Logan felt a caged restlessness stirring within him. The adrenaline that had fueled his confrontation with Blackwood ebbed, leaving a hollow ache. The unleashed violence, the primal fury, unnerved him. It was a facet of himself he had desperately suppressed, a darkness he feared might consume him whole. He began to spend his days patrolling the range, securing fences, repairing damaged gates. Anything to occupy his mind, to keep the specters at bay. But the past clung like a burr, refusing to be ignored. He saw the face of the man he had killed in every shadow, heard his death rattle in the soughing wind. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in fiery hues, Logan found himself drawn to the small, time-worn desk in his cabin. He unearthed paper and pen, his hand trembling imperceptibly. He was no scribe, but compulsion drove him. He had to try. He wrote to them, the kin of the man he had slain. He offered no justification, no minimization of the pain he had inflicted. He merely offered them the stark, unadorned truth. He recounted the impetuousness of youth, the inferno of rage, the terrible, irreversible consequences of violence. He wrote of the years of remorse, the burden of guilt he had borne, the relentless, gnawing reminder of the life he had extinguished. He sought no absolution, for he deserved none. But he hoped, prayed, that his words might offer a sliver of comfort, a flicker of understanding in the darkness. He poured his soul onto the page, exposing it in a way he never had before. When finished, he folded the letter meticulously, sealed it, and addressed it to the Texas town where the family still resided. He didn't know if he would ever send it, but the act of confession, of finally confronting his demons, had lifted a considerable weight. He discovered Mercy on the porch, swathed in a blanket, watching the sunset deepen. He settled beside her, the silence flowing between them, a comfortable, familiar current. "What were you doing?" she inquired softly, her eyes searching his. He hesitated, then offered her the letter. She accepted it, her fingers grazing his. She didn't break the seal. There was no need. She understood the heart laid bare within. "It's time," he said, his voice rough with the weight of it. "Time to face it all." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is," he countered, a faint smile gracing his lips. The letter lingered on the table for days, a silent witness to the past, an emblem of the future. Finally, one morning, Logan carried it into town and entrusted it to the mail. He didn't glance back. With Blackwood's reign concluded, redemption began to regenerate. The townsfolk, galvanized by Mercy's fortitude and Logan's unexpected dedication, started to rebuild, to reclaim their fractured lives. Fresh enterprises blossomed, established ones flourished, and the cloud of fear that had cloaked the town for so long began to dissipate. Mercy, her spirit unbroken, threw herself into managing the Double Bar M, revitalizing the ranch, expanding its reach. She introduced cutting-edge irrigation methods, enhanced the cattle stock, and cultivated a spirit of camaraderie among her hands. The Double Bar M became a beacon of hope, a symbol of the tenacity of the human spirit. Logan remained at her side, a steadfast source of strength and unwavering support. He was not the same man who had ridden into redemption months prior. The haunted depths of his eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet self-assurance, a sense of belonging. He remained a man of few words, but his actions were a torrent. He labored tirelessly on the ranch, his expertise and commitment earning the respect of all. He rediscovered laughter, smiled without constraint, dared to believe in the promise of tomorrow. One evening, as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon, Mercy turned to Logan, her eyes brimming with affection. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "For what?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "For everything," she responded. "For rescuing my ranch, for saving my town, for saving me." He reached out, enfolding her hand in his. "You saved me too, Mercy," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a reason to believe again, a reason to hope." The sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The air hummed with the scent of sage and the chirping chorus of crickets. They sat in quiet communion, their hands joined, their hearts overflowing. "What do you see when you gaze out at all this, Logan?" Mercy asked softly. He surveyed the sprawling vista, the lush fields, the grazing cattle, the distant hazy mountains. He considered the arduous labor, the tribulations, the sacrifices made. He considered the people who had united to defend their home, their future. He considered Mercy, her strength, her unwavering spirit, her love. "I see hope," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "I see a future forged in fire, tempered by hardship, and bound by love." He looked at Mercy, her face luminous in the fading glow. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that he was finally home. He was finally liberated. He was finally prepared to embrace the future, hand in hand with the woman he cherished. The past would forever be a part of him, but it no longer dictated his course. He was Logan Hart, rancher, protector, and Mercy Bell's husband. He was a man who had discovered redemption in the most unexpected of locales. A man who had learned to pardon himself and to place his faith in the transformative power of love. And as he surveyed the land he had come to claim as his own, he knew that their future, together, stretched as limitless and expansive as the sky above.